Hello to the 30 people who watch my videos. Welcome back to realizing you've subscribed to a creep who spends all of her time under a blanket recording her own voice. Today, I'm going to be reading the prologue of Hidden Beneath out loud since, well, most people seem to like to listen to things rather than read them, which I get because I spend all of my time drawing, and so I don't have time to read things, so I just listen to things. I'm mainly doing this because I really want Hidden Beneath to get more traction, it's I'm very passionate about it. So, yeah. I guess you can listen to this while in the background. Also, links to Hidden Beneath will be in the description, so that if you want to read it, and I don't end up doing more audio versions of the chapters, you can read that. Also, I do commissions, so you can get a picture like the one I'm doing in the background for only like $20 on my Ko-Fi, Coffee, whatever it's called. So yeah, go do that if you want. But I'm gonna read the prologue to my book. Yeah. Also, I'm a crappy writer, so keep that in mind. Like, I can't write. Also, I'm a theater kid, so chances are a lot of things are gonna be, like, really overdramatic. Also, I've grown up on warrior cats, so that probably doesn't help either. The cavern around Henry was covered in dust, seeming so ancient and worn down that he was worried the slightest breath might send everything crashing to the ground. It had obviously been lived in at one point or another. The ground was covered in a musty, prickly carpet, like bear's fur. A wooden table sat in the center of the room, looking like it could fall over at any moment, with 3 pillows circling it, the stuffing spilling out of them like blood from a corpse. The stone walls were an ugly gray, the only sturdy-looking part of this room. This is my home. The thought hadn't really sunk in, still floating around his skull and dodging his efforts to truly wrap his head around it. This was the home of my parents, the home of my people. This is the castle and the land where I should have grown up. It's pathetic, honestly. But he was here to change that, right? Henry clenched his fists, wincing as pain surged through his fingers and down to his palm. He'd bitten his nails till they bled the night before, then washed his hands until the skin began peeling right off of them. This wasn't anything new to him, but needless to say, he was in a lot of pain. No matter, I finally found my people. They'll listen to me. They'll worship me, and all of Madagascar will belong to the Drakens once more. He took in a lungful of air and puffed out his chest, smiling slightly to himself. After all, he had no reason to be nervous. He was a Dosse. His forefathers and foremothers had all been kings and queens, and their blood, their spirit, their essence ran through him. And the longer he waited, the longer his people were without a ruler. He glanced over at the hollowed-out tunnel in front of him, running with cracks and leading out to his destiny. He folded his hands behind his back and began to march through it, maneuvering his feet so he didn't step on any of the cracks, his draconic tail slithering behind him. At the end of the tunnel was a large cavern, the roof a mile high and the ground littered with stone huts and animal skin tents, arranged in circles around large bonfires. People with large bat-like wings and reptilian tails skittered around the place, their horns glinting in the faint light cast by the fires. The cavern was huge, but people crashed against each other, pushing and fighting to get to wherever they needed to go. Even from a glance, he could see how far they'd fallen from the once majestic, revered society. They had ribs jutting out from beneath their shoddily made tunics, and he could even see one snatching an odd, wrinkly fruit from a distracted shopkeeper. He wondered how long they'd been like this. Had his parents let them be this way? My parents would never have let them behave like this, he assured himself, trying to stifle the twitching in his tail. They must have been dead for a while. I don't need them for this. I can whip them back into shape, no problem. Careful as to not make too much noise, he stepped onto the stone ledge that served as a pavilion in front of him. A shoddily made fence surrounded the edges, seemingly made out of some creature's bones, shaking almost as much as Henry's tail. They were rough and dusty beneath his cracked palms, and he grasped onto them as he stared into the kingdom in front of him. The whole cave felt very claustrophobic, like the air was trying to constrict Dosse's muscles. The whole place stank, too. Not that he'd expected much from a kingdom that had been trapped underground for longer than most of them probably even knew. He shook his head. Stop observing the scenery, he scolded. You've waited for this moment your entire life. Your people will serve you. You're a king, and no one can take that away from you. He took in a gulp of air and cleared his throat loudly, waiting for the noise to die down and for someone to notice him. Neither happened. He huffed, trying to disguise his ever-increasing nervousness with annoyance, despite the fact that no one was even looking at him. He fiddled with his fingers, gazing blankly over the masses of people. There must be some way to grab their attention. He looked down at his writhing hands and suddenly grinned. There is a way. Henry, you brilliant man, you. Taking a deep breath, he thrust his hands into the air, palms towards the ceiling. Spears of ice shot out of his palms, hitting the ceiling and splitting apart like sharp, glassy firecrackers. Silence fell over the crowd like a flood as heads snapped towards the noise. Then, in a moment or two, thousands of wide eyes suddenly turned to him. Henry's grin widened. "Hello, dear friends," he began in a booming yet silkily smooth voice. He began to pace back and forth across the pavilion, his gaze never leaving the crowd in front of him as he studied them with prying eyes. "Do you know who I am?" He was met with silence. "That's what I thought. My name is Henry Dosse, but you may call me your splendor and majesty." The crowd below him murmured to one another, some looking incredulous, others looking at him with wide, awestruck eyes. "It seems to me like things have been tough for you lately. Up until now you didn't even have a ruler." He felt a small pang in his heart. He'd always hoped he'd get to meet his birth parents, but he knew from the moment he'd gotten here that they'd died long before he'd arrived. He wished they could see him now. "Your king and queen are dead, and you haven't seen the sun in 1,000 years, because that's how long it's been since our fellow realms drove us down below the surface." He barely had to think as he recited the speech he'd gone through so many times in his head. This all felt so familiar and yet so new, so exhilarating. He could barely hear his own voice over the thumping of his heart as he continued on. And why did they? What made them hate us? Power? A tad of overconfidence? And here we are, still being punished for the actions our forefathers might not even have committed. We are dragons, a proud noble race, and don't we have the right to be? We have the greatest connection to magic, and to the dragons from which we got our name. Yet here we are, still living under the dark, damp soil, slowly starving to death while the other realms bask in the sunlight. The expression in the crowd didn't shift. Henry wondered if his words were even getting through to them. "It's time for the dragons to rise again, and with me as your king, nobody will mistreat us. We will be revered, worshipped, and deliver justice to those who have wronged us." He waited for cheers, for celebration. It didn't come. His tail twitched faster. On the one hand, at least they weren't protesting. That was the worst possible outcome, right? On the other hand, there was evidently a lot of work to be done if these poor fools couldn't even stand up to him, a newcomer who hadn't even provided any proof as to who he claimed to be. What chance did they stand over the other realms, who'd be fighting with a passion over land and lives they didn't want to give up? He shook his head, trying to push away his doubts. With a bit of help, with a lot of help, I can make them the ruthless, cunning warriors they once were. They just have to give me, say, their undying loyalty. Finally, after what felt like an endless void of silence, somebody spoke up. "And why should we listen to you?" they called out, a hint of spite in their nasally voice. Henry's eyes widened, his expression flickering with surprise before he quickly resumed his mask of calm. He scanned the crowd in hopes of spotting who had spoken up, but to no avail. His eyes narrowed to slits. "Well, would anyone else like to step up to the task?" he hissed icily, scanning the sea of misshapen, scarred faces in front of him. Nobody answered. Henry smiled to himself, and not just at their silence. Even if it was only one voice, one draken, one measly sentence, it was a start. There was still fire in the spirits of these people. It was only a spark, sure, but with time and effort, even a spark could set a city ablaze. In fact, he would even go as far as to say it was the perfect amount of flare, enough to give him hope that his people were not too far gone, but not enough that he would have to worry about a revolution. Not that anyone will have any reason to rebel against me, because I'll be such an amazing leader that no one will have any reason to want to. I will be on the throne forever, as I should be. I deserve this. "But the curse!" a different voice cried out, but to Henry's frustration, he still couldn't spot the speaker. "What curse?" he snarled, trying to keep his panic out of sight. This talk of a curse was unfamiliar to him, a variable he hadn't quite factored in. "The curse that says that any draken who touches the sunlight will turn to ashes." A little boy stepped forward, his expression like a stone wall. In fact, he seemed more mature than most of the full-grown men present. His hair was a snowy white with hints of blue, and had the same texture as a dandelion. His draconic wings were small and matched his hair, with folds that were the same icy blue as the accents in his hair. And whether it means burning or straight-up turning to ashes, it's a painful way to go for sure. Henry scoffed. "There's no curse. If there was, would I be able to do this?" He allowed himself a small smirk as he swung his arm into the air, immediately followed by a deep rumbling noise as a sinkhole opened above him, spiraling like a whirlpool of dirt. Sunlight flooded into the underground kingdom, forming a small spotlight around the self-proclaimed king and spreading to the very edges of the cavern. Henry had to admit, when it wasn't hidden in the dark, the village almost looked like a home. He stifled a laugh as he examined the thousands of dumbfounded, slack-jawed expressions before him, and probably would have burst out into cackles if it weren't for the sick feeling in his stomach. That was one of the largest spells he had ever cast, and his exhilaration and excitement was perhaps the only thing that kept him from falling to the ground in pain. But he supposed that a bit of nausea was the smallest price to pay for the ability to cast magic and to bring hope to the makeshift kingdom. By this point, he wasn't even sure whether it was the way he'd disproven their superstitions or the magic he possessed that really impressed them. But it didn't matter. You could see the shift in their expression, the light that seemed to appear in their eyes. The spark had grown into a flame. All they needed was one more push. Don't you see? If there really was a curse, I wouldn't even be down here, and at the very least, you would all be shriveled piles of ashes. I know more than you would think. Follow me. It's time to take back what belongs to us. He grinned from ear to ear. Not just because he'd accomplished his purpose, and that months of planning had proven successful, but because with him as their leader, the dragon-human hybrids would live like the kings they were. He didn't say another word as he spread his wings and thrust them downwards, propelling himself into the endless blue sky as fresh air filled his lungs. He could hardly imagine living without this, the sensation of the wind carrying your wings, the sunlight bathing your skin in scales and warmth. He widened his wings to their limit, half to soak up as much sunlight as possible, half to show off the sparkling dots decorating his wings like stars. He glanced backwards. His kingdom was following, flooding out of the hole like ants from an anthill, chanting a name, the name of their new king. His name. He surveyed the field around him, full of grass as tall as a person, making sure no one was nearby. He'd always been told tales of the old Draken Kingdom was haunted, so he wasn't surprised that nobody was here. But still, better safe than sorry. He stiffened as, for a fleeting moment, he glimpsed a flash of blue in the corner of his gaze, making its way through the maze of foliage. But when it disappeared the moment he turned to get a good look at it, he decided to chalk it up to the remnants of nausea left behind from using his magic. Hey! Dosse! Henry spun around to see a small girl hovering in front of him, grinning toothily. She had long brown hair full of tangled curls, and a darkened complexion that matched the color of her wings. A crown of flowers, the likes of which Henry wasn't sure how she'd gotten her hands on while underground, was woven into her hair. In fact, she looked much too delighted and pure to truly grasp the situation she had been in only moments ago. "My name is Jaybird," she chirped, her tail lashing back and forth as she wobbled in the air. "But you can call me Jay. Are you going to save us from being down there?" She quieted before her expression shifted, her grin faltering for a moment and her tail slowing. "It's dark and cold." She immediately brightened up again as she went on. "And I've never been above the ceiling. It's so beautiful. Can I help you do your kingy stuff? Ooh, I have an idea. I can command your armies." Henry stifled a laugh. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but you might be a little too small for that, Jay." She stuck out her bottom lip in a pout, and she crossed her arms over one another, looking like a small toddler about to have a temper tantrum, which she pretty much was. "And I'm not small!" Henry chuckled and ruffled her hair. "We'll see about that, Jay," he teased, turning away and flying to the head of the crowd. "I don't think that Draconette quite understands what's happening, and what has to be done in the name of justice." His expressions hardened, and he clenched his fists again, this time not even noticing the pain. His voice rose to a yell as he spun around to address his subjects. "Don't you see?" This time the chatter immediately stopped at the sound of his booming voice. "This is what they've stolen from you, fellow Drakens. Is it fair that for 1,000 years you were all kept away from the beauty of the world, from the warmth of the sun, from the light that every other realm was supposed to have without even giving it a second thought? No, it isn't." The crowd around him cheered in agreement, a trumpet of 1,000 voices, all different, coming together as one whole. He grinned once more, his heart pounding over it all. "Come with me, and I will secure the future you all deserve." So, yeah, that's the prologue of Hidden Beneath. I'm kind of proud of it, but it's everything, it all goes downhill from there. You should read it, though. You should read it. Please. Please. I've poured my lifeblood into this story. Please, sir. But yeah, all characters belong to me and Chunk, and I made them, and I made the world, and I made the story, and the writing belongs to me, and the voice is mine. I don't know, okay. Anyways, links to Hidden Beneath are in the description if you want to go look at the rest of it. Also, no one has left a comment on it yet, so you could be the first to write a comment on it. Go down in history, the first to comment on Hidden Beneath, aside from my friend who commented on the Google Doc. But not Wattpad. Be the first Wattpad commenter. I'll stop rambling now, and you can go do your own thing now. If people like this, and since it seems to be more accessible than Wattpad, I might do more of it, like do more audiobooks of the chapters so that I can have more people read Hidden Beneath or like hear the story or whatever. We'll see. I hope you enjoyed this, and bye-bye. Okay, so the speed paint is still going, so I'm just gonna like ramble for a few minutes, although I already did do a lot of rambling. But anyways, look at it go. Look at the drawing, yeehaw yo. I already slowed the speed paint down. Like, it was too short, so I slowed the footage down, and that's why it's all choppy. But now it's too long. Okay, it's done. Yay, there we go. Look at him. He's beautiful. Anyways, goodbye now.